Did the United States sabotage the Nord Stream gas pipelines connecting Russia and Germany? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. It's been 5 months since a series of explosions damaged Russia's Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Despite numerous investigations, it's yet to be determined who's responsible. But a report by the investigative journalist Seymour Hersh is gaining a lot of attention. He claims the United States was responsible. Washington vehemently denies any involvement. Now Russia is calling on the United Nations Security Council to ask for an independent inquiry. We begin with this report from CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King.
Good afternoon.
Just days before Russia and Ukraine resumed hostilities last year, US President Joe Biden, next to their newly elected German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, gave this ominous warning about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline at the White House.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project is within Germany's control?
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Then, last September, leaks were detected in the 1,200-kilometre-long pipeline, and investigations launched by Swedish, Danish and other regional governments pointed to sabotage. Moscow blamed Washington and its allies. Washington blamed Moscow. However, the sabotage was downplayed here in the West. That was until last month, with explosive allegations from the Pulitzer Prize-winning US journalist Seymour Hersh. He accused the US of being behind the attack on the pipeline.
The worry was that Russia was weaponizing this gas. It was using it to get leverage in West Germany, Western Europe and Germany, and that was always something that was problematical for us. We wanted to keep Russia from having energy power.
Hersh came to fame after publishing details of a massacre carried out by US troops at the village of My Lai in Vietnam back in 1968. These latest allegations have been dismissed by the US government, as the My Lai massacre was first dismissed nearly 50 years ago. However, his report led Russia to call a meeting of the United Nations Security Council and for a UN-led investigation last month.
Obviously, all these facts in the Hersh report should be the subject of an international investigation. At the same time, we cannot count on the unbiased position of the Norwegian authorities and their willingness to cooperate constructively in this matter. We have evidence to that effect as well.
The governments of Denmark, Sweden and Germany have also sent a letter to members of the UN Security Council saying their findings point to, quote, powerful explosions due to sabotage. The case for US involvement is interesting, as it would have meant a direct attack on infrastructure owned in part by a close ally, Germany. However, long-standing US opposition to Nord Stream 2 and its sister pipeline Nord Stream 1 is well known. Sanctions against European companies and private pressure over the pipelines date back decades to the Reagan administration. And even though Nord Stream 2 was not yet fully operational at the time of the attack, it was ready to pump reliable, cheap gas at the outset of hostilities in Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is due here at the White House on Friday, nearly a year since his first visit, and many questions remain about the Nord Stream 2 attack, and they're likely to remain unanswered. We understand that the White House has said that there is going to be no press conference between the German Chancellor and US President Biden this time. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the White House.
For more now on the investigation, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Toronto is Aurel Braun. He is a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. Also with us from Massachusetts is Klaus Larres. He's a visiting scholar at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University. From New York, Aaron Maté is a contributor to The Nation and host of Pushback with Aaron Maté on the Grayzone. And Ray McGovern is a former analyst with the United States Central Intelligence Agency. He joins us from North Carolina. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Ray McGovern, you've been doing a lot of work on this pipeline explosion. You addressed the United Nations on the explosion as well. You believe that there are serious question marks over these pipeline blasts. What are these questions that you have?
Well, the questions that I have pretty much been answered by Seymour Hersh's meticulous investigative reporting. Sy is the best of the best. People seek him out because he gives them protection. He has protected his source as a perfect record for doing that. His sources apparently saw this act of war being plotted, were aghast that this act of war was part of what the U.S. was doing, and went to Sy because they could rely on him to tell the story straight and to protect the sources. I would add one thing here, and that is with Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, coming here tomorrow or Friday. Let me just interject that it was really quite remarkable that when, as you just heard, the President of the United States said, yes, we can end this Nord Stream pipeline. We have the capable of doing it. Olaf Scholz was at the next podium. And the bilingual reporter, to her credit, well, what do you think about this, Chancellor Scholz? I mean, doesn't Germany control the pipeline? And what did Scholz do? He said, we do everything together. There is nothing important that we do that we don't do together. So the German people are properly up in arms now, asking Olaf Scholz, did you do this together with Mr. Biden? Or did he surprise you? Was it a big surprise to you when this line was broke up? Yeah. Either way, it's pretty damning, and that's what Scholz has to work out with Biden on Friday, figure out how to put the lid on this thing, because it is really, really a devastating development. Relations between the U.S. and Germany in the first instance and Western Europe in the second are never going to be the same.
Okay, Aurel, Braun, that lengthy investigative piece was by Seymour Hersh, of course. His article goes into great detail on how the attack was carried out, how it was planned, how it was carried out, who was involved. The United States government has responded to that. It says the piece is, quote, utterly false and complete fiction. What is your view?
We are looking, in the case of some people, whether it is the extreme right, MAGA Republicans, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson, and the extreme left, the search for conspiracies. And in the case of Seymour Hersh, he is a reporter who has broken some important stories. But in this case, this was not vetted. This was not sources, as my fellow panelists said. This was one unverifiable, anonymous source. And that is not credible journalism. And of course, there is a possibility that the United States was involved. But is there a probability? It's unlikely. Is there a certainty? Well, we have to wait for the evidence. There's an investigation that is ongoing by Denmark, by Sweden, by Germany. I think it would be proper to wait for the results of that investigation. We can spin all these theories. We can make arguments that it would be the United States who had it in its interest. One could make very powerful arguments that this was very much in Russia's interest to blow up parts of the pipeline.
How would it be in Russia's interest?
Russia already was getting much less revenue than it was getting before. They had chosen to reduce the amount of energy they were supplying via this pipeline by something like 80% by June of last year. They were clearly weaponizing that energy. They were using it as a punitive measure. Let's not forget that it was also the case that 49% of this pipeline is owned by Western shareholders. And it sent a really powerful message. You do not comply, or you do not act in a way that is congruent with Russian interests.
Yeah, Aurel, I'm not sure I understand this. You're saying that there was a limited amount of gas which was going through the pipeline, which would have meant that Russia was getting less money. Why would they destroy the pipeline completely? That means they're getting no money whatsoever.
So the pipeline wasn't destroyed completely. Russia said, for example, that one of the pipelines, there are 4 pipelines, Baltic 2 was still functioning. This can be repaired. Germany was already moving away from energy dependence.
Yeah.
And this would be a very stark demonstration of the power of Russia, process of intimidation, of trying to say to the Europeans that you are going to pay a very heavy price for supporting Ukraine.
Yeah.
You not follow American policies. Now, we don't know this for certain. I'm just putting this forward that one can, and if we had more time, we can flesh out this theory. It's very easy to provide a circumstantial set of reasons where we could say it was Russia, and I think it could be fairly persuasive. But we do not have incontrovertible evidence.
Yeah.
Anyone who says that we have incontrovertible evidence is not telling us the truth.
Okay, Aaron Mattei, I want you to respond to what we've just heard there, but let me start first with a criticism of Seymour Hersh's report that we've heard from other sources as well. I mean, we've seen here in the United States, the mainstream media has discredited his reporting, saying that he used, as we just heard, a single anonymous source. Hersh, for his part, says there is no alternative when it comes to working with civilians and military members inside the United States government. This is what he said in an interview with The Hill recently. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
They really understand that they've taken their oath of office not to their boss, not to the general or admiral, and not to the president, but to the Constitution. And those are people that, when they get troubled by things that are going on, have talked to me. And this been going on. I've done this for 50 years.
So, Aaron, what do you make of that criticism that Seymour Hersh depended on one single anonymous source?
Seymour Hersh has a lifetime of impeccable, award-winning journalism, and I'll take one legendary journalist and one known source over what we're used to in U.S. establishment journalism, which is multiple reporters citing multiple anonymous officials who are telling us lies. Look at Russiagate. Look at Havana Syndrome. Look at Russian bounties in Afghanistan. Look at Hunter Biden's laptop being a Russian influence operation. So just because you have more than one source doesn't mean you are telling the truth, as we know about from so many scams in U.S. history. Look also at Iraq WMDs. Plenty of anonymous officials were behind that too. Was that story real? So I'll take Seymour Hersh and his lifetime of impactful, award-winning journalism over anybody else in establishment media. He's earned that respect. And also, we don't know how many sources he had. He cites one source. There could be more. He's very good at protecting his sources. Now, putting aside even size reporting, you have so much circumstantial evidence, it's kind of ridiculous that this is even being debated. You have U.S. officials for a long time articulating that they have a goal of breaking the relationship between Russia and Germany. Condi Rice said this back in 2014 or 2015, that we need to break Germany's dependence on Russian energy, and Germany should be buying energy from us, from the U.S. Then you have a RAND Corporation study in 2019 saying that a top priority for undermining Russia economically is stopping Nord Stream 2. And then you have U.S. officials, from Joe Biden to Antony Blinken to Victoria Nuland, vowing to stop the pipeline. Biden and Nuland said this early on in the Ukraine war. Right after Nord Stream was blown up, Blinken called this a tremendous opportunity. And by the way, speaking of investigations, where is the U.S. investigation of this? If the U.S. really believed that Russia blew up the pipeline or somebody else, why hasn't Biden tasked his intelligence community, among the best in the world, to do an investigation? That's because he doesn't want an investigation, because he's the one who blew it up. And by the way, one more telling thing, and your correspondent Nathan King broke some very important news. He says that unlike last time Olaf Scholz came to Washington, there was no joint news conference plan between Biden and Scholz. Why is that? Because the last time this happened, Biden, as Ray talked about, vowed to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I think it would be too awkward now for the two of them to stand together now that Biden followed through on his pledge.
One other thing, Aaron, of course, you're a journalist as well. I mean, the mainstream media has been very quick to attack the messenger in this story. It's an exclusive. It's a very big story. And, you know, we look at how the media operates, and when you have a big story like this, which is exclusive, the rest of the media scramble to get what they can. They start carrying out their own investigations to see if they can match the kind of reporting that we're seeing. But we're not seeing any of that.
No, we're not. And that's a sad commentary on where establishment media is at these days. They're there to serve the power, not cover them critically. And that's why someone like Seymour Hersh, who comes from establishment media, spent a long time at the New York Times, wrote for the New Yorker, is now publishing independently on Substack. And yes, if the media was interested in doing its job, it would be following this story and trying to corroborate Tsai's reporting, whether trying to chase down whether it's right or not. But they don't want to do that because I think they know he's right, and they don't want to contradict the people that they rely on for their stories, which is people in power.
Klaus Larres, Germany, of course, is one of the main benefactors of Russian energy. In fact, there are people who will tell you that much of Germany's spectacular economic growth is attributed in part to its access to cheap Russian energy. So what is the feeling in Germany about what happened?
Well, I think listening to all the previous speakers, we really don't know. Hersh may be right, but he may also be wrong. He has got a good track record, this is very true, but the New Yorker, I believe, turned down his article because they didn't think it was substantial enough. And having just one source is really not enough. The previous speaker just said he may have had more sources. Well, we can speculate wildly. If he had had more sources, he could have referred to them, not by name, but indicated that he had other people who spoke to. So we really don't know. And I think we can speculate as much as we want whether he is right or whether he is wrong. We really need more evidence. And when Scholz and Biden had their joint press conference, whether Biden really meant an explosion when he said he had means of preventing the pipeline functioning if Russia invaded Ukraine, then we don't know whether he was referring to an explosion or by economic means. The same applies to that press conference, that joint press conference, which probably will not take place tomorrow in the White House. I don't think that the two politicians will talk about the pipeline that much. They will mention it, but I think the story of Ukraine, what to do about Russian aggression in Ukraine, how to unify the West, will be much more dominant in their talks than the pipeline. And there has been no real outrage in Germany. I think one member of parliament questioned regarding Hersh's article, but the government hasn't really responded all that much. Neither has the German media or the German public, because I think no one really knows whether that story is right.
Okay, Klaus, you know, as you say, there is a big question mark over who did this. But if it wasn't the United States, as Seymour Hersh is saying, then who would have carried out? Who has this kind of technological capability to blow up a pipeline which is lying far beneath the surface of the sea?
I think you're perfectly right. It probably was a government. And the United States had a perfect good reason from their point of view to be the culprit. But as one of the previous speakers said, perhaps the Russians also had some reasoning for doing it. We don't really know. And it may well be right that Hersh points a finger correctly at the United States. But I think we don't have the evidence to clearly substantiate that.
Right. Ray McGovern, when we've heard this before, that Russia would have been responsible for blowing up its own pipeline. The Washington Post reported in December that it was the assessment of 23 diplomatic and intelligence officials in 9 countries that there is no evidence that Russia was involved in the attack. I mean, there is also the question on why would Russia attack one of its own pieces of infrastructure?
Well, that's, of course, a very good question. There is no answer to it other than someone who would allege that the Russians would shoot themselves in their own foot. If they want to turn off the pipeline, they turn the lever, turn off the pipeline. $11 billion that thing costs. Absent the pipeline, they don't have any leverage. I'd like to go back to the defamation of Seymour Hersh, the slander that he's being subjected to, not by these participants, but by others. I'm waiting for people to suggest that he's been sleeping with Swedish women, the way they got Julian Assange, bogus charge. Tsai is 85. People say, way to go, Tsai, if that's what you're doing. Well, you know, exactly this time 20 years ago, Newsweek reported that the son of Saddam Hussein, Hussein Kamel, who headed up the chemical, biological, nuclear program, such it was, and a missile program in Iraq, had testified to the UN, to the UK, and to the US that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Newsweek ran that story. They went up, the correspondents, the reporters ran up to get the straight scoop.
Yeah.
Where'd they go? They went up to Langley, Virginia, to CIA headquarters. And what were they told? They were told this. This is incorrect, bogus, wrong, untrue. 4 adjectives. Now, it turned out to be exactly right. That was 1 month before the attack on Iraq, and the reporters just shrunk and went away because it was not the party line. So Hersh's story is not the party line, but it's the only line that makes any logical sense.
Yeah. Aurel, Braun, the United Nations Security Council have discussed the pipeline blasts. Here is what China's permanent representative to the UN, Zhang Jun, had to say. Let's listen to him.
Failure to pinpoint all the details of the Nord Stream pipeline explosions and the parties who carried out the sabotage will send the wrong signal, making those who plotted wrongdoing believe that they can act on their own will. An objective, impartial and professional inquiry into the matter, responsible investigation and the release of the results as soon as possible are not only about the incident itself, but also about the security of global transnational infrastructure, which is closely bound with the interests and concerns of all countries.
So, Aurel, does the ambassador make a valid, relevant point there? If there is no credible investigation into who did this, it could mean open season on civilian infrastructure anywhere in the world.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because an investigation could reveal all sorts of things. I'm far from persuaded that an investigation by Sweden, which has a long history of neutrality, they want to join NATO now, but they were incredibly accommodating to Russia. Denmark, a state that has been a member of NATO, but has tried very hard to have good relations with Russia. Germany, which had allowed itself to be energy dependent on Russia and tried very hard not to challenge Russia, that they would not have a proper investigation, and I would rather wait for that. And I think it's also very important, not to use terms such the record of a journalist is impeccable. No journalist has a record that is 100%. And that includes Mr. Hersh, who has done admirable reporting in the past. But his prediction, for example, that the United States was going to attack Iran, and he did that repeatedly, going back to the Bush administration, he was wrong. Israel was going to attack Iran. He was wrong about that. He had alleged that Mr. Skripal, who was poisoned, that was not Russia. That was something that was done by some groups of criminal organizations. There's no evidence to support that. So let's not operate on the basis that there is some kind of journalistic infallibility based on one unverifiable anonymous source. And this is why, in the absence of incontrovertible evidence, just as I would be prepared to accept the possibility that it could be United States, not the probability at this point. So we have to be very careful.
Why is the United States not calling for an investigation?
They have 3 allies that are doing an investigation. Why would they wish to undermine their allies? Why would they send the message?
Well, they could be part of the investigation, couldn't they?
Well, they are not the locals. This explosion happened in the exclusive economic zones of Sweden and Denmark. The appropriate countries to investigate that are those 2 countries. And the other one was Germany, which has something like a 32% ownership of that pipeline. And again, I have to emphasize, this pipeline has not been destroyed. It can be rebuilt. Russia could rebuild it. Russia's main source income came from oil. It was very clear that Germany was going to wean itself away from Russian energy.
Yeah.
They knew this. It would have been superfluous for the United States to blow this pipeline out since this pipeline was going to become dysfunctional as a result of political policy by Germany.
All right.
Why would you to do this?
Aaron, as we've heard, there is an ongoing investigation being carried out by Sweden, Denmark, and Germany. This attack took place 5 months ago. These three countries have not shared any information on what they've found so far. I mean, do you believe that will be a credible, honest investigation?
Everyone knows that these NATO states in Europe now follow U.S. orders. That's openly admitted. You can read about that in all the major U.S. papers. This proxy war in Ukraine has cemented U.S. hegemony, which I think was a major U.S. goal. Let me also address some of the false claims made about Seymour Hersh. It was said earlier that he went to the New Yorker first with a story. That's just not true. He's been planning on publishing this independently from the start. I know that firsthand. It was also claimed that he predicted that the U.S. was going to bomb Iran. He reported that under Dick Cheney there was planning for that. The New Yorker has never retracted that reporting. And who knows, maybe Seymour Hersh's reporting helped prevent such a bombing, especially after the disaster that Cheney and Bush caused in Iraq. It was also said that he had an opinion about who was responsible for the Skripal poisoning. He never did any reporting on that. That must be a reference to something he said in an interview. But we don't know who actually poisoned the Skripals. There's been no serious evidence presented that it was Russia. There's been the Skripals have been kept from the public ever since that incident happened and by the UK intelligence service.
Yeah.
So that's very much an open question. And all of this is an attempt to avoid the obvious here, which is that Hersh simply gave us the details on what is obvious to anyone with their eyes open. The U.S. had the motive, the U.S. expressed the intent, and they went through with bombing the Nord Stream 2, thereby fulfilling a very key strategic goal for them, which is blow up an off-ramp to peace and keep Germany in the proxy war coalition.
Klaus Larres, we've only got about 40 seconds left, but as we heard, Chancellor Scholz will be in Washington on Friday, that's tomorrow. What do you expect will come out of that meeting?
They will talk about the Ukraine war and keeping the West united and to make, continue the effort to help Ukraine and fight back Russia. That will be the main topic. And of course, it is totally wrong, as the previous speaker just said, that the Western Europeans or the Europeans take orders from the United States. Of course not. This is ridiculous to claim that. And also the Skripal poisoning, it is clear that that was Moscow and Russia.
Yeah.
It has been proven many times. But the conversation tomorrow between Scholz and Biden will be constructive. They will also talk about the pipeline, I'm pretty sure. And if it is true that the Americans did it, which we don't know at the moment, we really don't know, then the Germans, of course, will not be pleased. And they will talk about that with Biden. But I don't think that the alliance between Germany and the United States will be undermined by that.
All right, great. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C.